The Sherpa Screening Room is a presentation of the Sherpa's podcast picks, which can be heard on podcast apps everywhere, and the Sherpalution YouTube page. It's where you'll hear from creators from many fields from all over the world. Now, we take you to the Sherpa Chalet where your host, Jim the Podcast Sherpa, awaits you. Kind of like how I'm waiting to get paid for this.
Welcome to the Sherpa Screening Room. This week's guest is B.R. Bates, author of the true crime novel, The Crack City Strangler. Please bear in mind that some of the content mentioned in this episode may be disturbing to certain listeners, so please take care or catch one of our other episodes if it might be upsetting to you. But keep in mind, even in other episodes, the Sherpa has been known to murder a joke or two.
Coming to you from Sherpa Chalet in beautiful downtown Mount Podcastia, it's time for entertainment interviews in the Sherpa Screening Room. Grab an aisle seat and a bucket of popcorn, but don't crunch too loud or you'll miss the show. Now, here's your host, Jim, the Podcast Sherpa.
Welcome to the Sherpa Screening Room. It is a presentation of the Sherpa's podcast picks, and that Sherpa in question would be me, Jim the Podcast Sherpa, coming to you from Sherpaloo Studios here in the Sherpa Chalet, high atop Mount Podcastia, where I get to look out my window and gaze out at all the millions and millions of podcasts that are out there. But in these episodes, we don't talk about podcasts. No, we are talking to creators, the singers, the dancers, the musicians, directors, producers, and the writers. Why do I say and the writers? Because we've got a writer in today's interview. Her name is B.R. Bates, and at the time of this recording, she's just released her 10th book. It is called The Crack City Strangler. It is the story of a serial killer in the city of Detroit and the surrounding areas in 1991, 1992, who killed and tortured 11 women. And I got to spend a little time with her just to get to know her about all the stuff that she's written. She's written a whole bunch of different types of books as well. Very interesting lady and has a very interesting background too. So we got to get to know her and we talked a lot about the book. So if you are a true crime fan, this is an episode that you are going to like. So let's have a listen to my conversation with B.R. Bates, author of The Crack City Strangler. Hello there, Rebels. We are here in the Sherpa Screening Room. My guest today is a journalist and an author of 10 books. Her most recent book is called The Crack City Strangler, The Homicides of Serial Killer Benjamin Atkins, Murders in the Motor City, Book 2. Her name is B.R. Bates, coming to us from her home state of Michigan, where actually a lot of this crime took place. B.R., welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Now, you originally, you worked for a newspaper a while back. Was that what you did?
Yeah. I was in the newspaper business for about 10 years in daily newspapers. I worked in Detroit for 5 years at the Detroit News. I also worked in Wisconsin for the Wausau Daily Herald, and I worked at another newspaper in Michigan called the Saginaw News.
Were you a crime reporter, or you just did whatever stories that were human interest or?
You know, I never was a crime reporter back then. I really was not into true crime at that time when I was in newspapers. In Wausau and Saginaw, I worked on a little bit of everything. I was mainly editing copy and doing layout of pages. And so I did news and features and sports and whatever. And then in Detroit, at the Detroit News, I worked in the features department as a copy editor and worked a lot on editing copy, like I said, and then layout of pages, designing pages, things like that.
Okay, so all the background stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, I got it. So what piqued your interest in, I know this is actually book 2. The book 1 is also about a different serial killer. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm, that is correct.
The baby doll killer?
Yep, the baby doll killer, John Eric Armstrong.
Okay. Were these two men, they didn't know each other or anything like that? You're linking them kind of with the stories. That's
right.
Their connection.
They are two well-known serials as far as Michigan and in particular Detroit serials are concerned. Detroit has had a number of serial killers over the years, but these two are cases that a lot of people remember as happening in Detroit. And they both happened in 1990s or early 2000s. The Atkins case was 1991 and 1992. He was arrested in 1992. And then the Armstrong case was a few years later in late, like 1999 and 2000 is actually when he was arrested.
Yeah, we should talk about the subject of this book, Benjamin Atkins. In the span of a little bit over a year, he abducted, tortured, raped, and killed 11 women, and ultimately was caught by one of the survivors of his attacks. And he was arrested only by his confession and by what the witness said. Is that true?
Well, he was convicted on physical evidence. He was convicted on DNA.
Okay.
But yeah, he was identified by his sole known survivor at the time. Her name was Darlene. And Atkins had attacked her in fall 1991 in Detroit. And then he first killed someone probably a month or two after that. So when you talk about the other 11 women that were known of at the time, 11 that he killed and then one who survived. So really 12 women he attacked in about a year. But the women he killed probably between either November or December 1991 and the end of May 1992. So it's actually, we can't really pinpoint the beginning dates. We know the last murder was at the end of May 1992, but as far as the beginning, we can't quite pinpoint. But because of this short time frame, he has been called America's fastest serial killer. He moved very fast.
And he confessed to everything when the police arrested him?
He did. It took a little doing. He was first chatting with the police who were interrogating him and not really willing to give much up. But there was a very skilled interrogator. His name was Ron Sanders. He has since passed on. Actually, he died in just the past year. But Ron Sanders was very good at what he did. And Ron Sanders was the one who, I guess you would say, broke him and got Atkins to start confessing. And once he started confessing, then they all just tumbled out. In fact, the police knew of 10 of the 11 women. They did not know about the 11th until he started talking. And he said, "Oh, there's the one that you haven't found yet." And so that was the final victim that was killed at the end of May. Her name was Cece Waymer.
And most of these women, I believe they were either prostitutes or drug addicts. And he was really under the radar for a good portion of the time with the police. Well, he wasn't really a known criminal, was he, up until that point?
He totally was not. He had come on police radar briefly a couple times for trespassing in buildings. He was questioned in Highland Park in late 1991 because he was hanging around a building where he shouldn't have been. And then in early 1992, January 1992, he was questioned by Detroit police for basically the same thing, like, why are you in this building? And he was homeless, so he was using these abandoned buildings in Highland Park and Detroit to just sleep at night. And he was murdering the women in those buildings too. But yeah, he came on police radar a couple times briefly. Other than that, he made a lot of effort to hide his crimes. He made a lot of effort to hide the women after he killed them. Mm-hmm. And so they were discovered one by one as time went on, but they were often discovered quite a few weeks after they were killed, unfortunately.
I was listening to an interview that you'd given, and you said that it's interesting that Atkins is really in stark contrast to the baby doll killer who really kept his victims out in the open.
Mm-hmm. Yep. John Eric Armstrong did not really care about hiding his victims. He would just he would kill them in his car, and he would open the passenger side door and really just push them out and just leave them right there and drive away. Sometimes police felt that he posed the body sometimes. I think there may have been a certain degree of that too, but he definitely didn't make any effort to hide them like Atkins did. Atkins did not want to be caught in that way. He was trying to be careful. He was pretty methodical about that. But Armstrong, I don't know, you have to wonder if, was there a certain part of him that wanted to get caught?
Right. And I guess with Atkins' childhood, I mean, he was obviously a disturbed individual. We can, easily say that. But I guess he discovered that his mother was a prostitute when she, I guess, rediscovered him, because he'd run away from the foster home and then went to live with her and he and his brother, right?
Yeah, he and his brother were always together through their childhood. His brother was 1 year older than he was, and anytime that they were placed in a home, they were always placed together. But as far as his mom, yeah, his mom was largely absent. She had gotten in trouble with the law. She was incarcerated. She was in and out of different situations. She was an admitted drug addict, and she was working prostitution. So at one point, the two boys became wards of the county, and they were placed in various homes over the years. But yeah, there was a lot of school truancy involved in their lives. They were doing a little breaking and entering as juveniles. They were just having a lot of trouble, and they did run away. Yeah, you referenced like running away from one of the homes. Yeah, that happened too, when the police had to go find them, and they were pretty close by. But it was, I guess it must have been pretty difficult for them to be reined in any sense. And they were also in a home for boys, which was very traumatic for Atkins in itself. So his childhood is just marked by a lot of negative circumstances.
Right. Because didn't he say that he really just had a problem with prostitutes? Was that one of his defenses, apparently, right?
You know, he said that, and then he said that he didn't. He conflicted. He gave contradictory responses to a lot of the questions. He would say, it's not that I hate women, it's that I hate prostitutes. Oh no. And then in another time he would say, no, I don't have any issues with women or prostitutes. So it was really hard to ascertain where he was coming from when police were questioning him. But of course, his mom worked as a prostitute, and she took him and his brother along on some of her occasions, her meetings with clients or Johns, and he witnessed that behavior. And so he did. I mean, I think anybody who's familiar with the case would say that, yes, he did develop a hatred for prostitutes. And a lot of the people who worked the case, a lot of the police officers who worked the case said that he really was killing his mother over and over again with these victims because, yeah, like as you said, they were all working prostitution. And they were all drug addicts too. And those were two main features of his mother, and the demographic fit for his mom very perfectly with all of these victims. It's very sad.
Did his brother have anything to do with these crimes, or they were kind of separated at that point?
They were separated. His brother had a girlfriend that he was living with in Highland Park. He seemed to have a pretty stable life. He had had some issues with drugs, but he was getting off the drugs. And that was one reason why he would let Ben stay with him for a while. But then he had to boot him out at a certain point because he felt like his brother was drawing him back into that drug culture. So Benjamin's brother wanted to live a better life. And because of that, Ben was largely on the streets and still just really immersed in drugs. And so it's interesting that the two boys shared so many of their childhood experiences, yet one became a serial killer and one did not. As far as I know, his brother really has not had much, if any, trouble with the law. It really is Benjamin who, you know, I don't think his brother was involved in any of this business. This was Ben just going off on his own when he was wandering Woodward Avenue as a homeless person, really.
So what kind of physical evidence did they find that ultimately led to his arrest? Because didn't they say when he was having sex with the prostitutes, he was actually using a condom, so there was no seminal fluid that they could trace? Yes.
Isn't that crazy? He did use a condom for a lot of the occurrences that he said in his confessions. And there were condoms found at some of the scenes. Not all condoms were from the murders. These scenes, these murders happening in the abandoned buildings, these abandoned buildings were frequented by a lot of people. A lot of other drug addicts would just go there to get high, or maybe they'd have their own liaisons there, whatever. And so these were buildings that were used a lot by homeless or transient people. And so they had trash everywhere. And so that was one of the challenges with the police in processing, or the evidence techs with processing the scenes, in that they couldn't tell what was there from the murder and what was there from any other situation that was happening in that abandoned place. And so the Monterey Motel on Woodward Avenue in Highland Park. It is no longer there. It's since been torn down, but it was an abandoned motel where a lot of people would come and go as far as that street life or the homeless culture there in the city. And it was a well-used abandoned building. And that was where police found 3 of Atkins' victims on the same day, although they were all killed at different times. So there was one, the Valerie Chalk scene, which was room 68 in the Monterey Motel. There was a condom there. It was a yellow condom. And actually, after Atkins was arrested months later, he even mentioned with Valerie that he had used a yellow condom. So that linked it up. But they did find semen. They did find the physical evidence in the condom. As I recall, it was not enough to actually do a DNA sample of at the time. This was 1992 that this is happening. And so there was that. But then also in that same scene with Valerie Chalk, there was a tissue, and they found a sample on the tissue that actually they did get DNA from, and it did match Atkins. So they did place him there. And then another room of the motel, I think it was room 35, that was Juanita Hardy was the name of the woman who was found there. And all 3 women at the Monterey Motel were left in the bathroom of a room in the shower stall. And so Juanita was in the shower stall, but there was a palm print on the wall of the shower stall, and that palm print matched Atkins. So there was that physical evidence. There was his confessions. There was the identification of the survivor, Darlene. So all in all, the jury's convicted him.
It's interesting. You, towards the end of your book, you mentioned the similarities between Atkins and a lot of other serial killers, especially with the hatred of prostitutes and the fact that he strangled all of them, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep, his MO was strangulation. Yeah, every victim was strangled.
So it's interesting that he's doing all this in just like this quick period of time, and he knows how to be like evasive for up until obviously the last time, where the other serial killers that you talked about, they kind of had that same sort of pattern. It's very unusual. And it wasn't like he was probably studying up on them. It just kind of fell that way.
Yeah, they say serials have to hone their craft a little bit. Like maybe their first couple assaults are not very good. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they leave someone alive, like in the case of Atkins. He not only left Darlene alive, but we found out that there was another assault survivor from a year earlier. Her assault was not as violent. She went off to smoke with Atkins, and it was all very casual. She knew him. She had seen him around, and really all of these women had seen him around and knew him by the nickname Tony, or the street name Tony. Mm-hmm. And so this other survivor, her name is Margie, she just went to smoke with him, and it just went sideways, and he became someone else, and she was able to just leave, like talk her way out of it and get out of there. But she really doesn't know what would have happened if she didn't do that. And so you wonder, okay, that happened in December 1990, almost a year before he attacked Darlene. There could have been others along the way that we don't know about. But you wonder if he was working up to that point when he was actually going to take a human life. You really have to wonder that, because with Darlene, I think he did fully intend to kill her. And she realized that he had already raped her, and he was trying to drag her into the basement of this building. And she's like, okay, that's really not going to be good. And so she fought him for everything that she was worth, and she was able to get away. And then there was someone else when she got outside of the building, someone else nearby when she screamed, who really saved her life, because then he shouted back and Atkins ran off. But you have to wonder, okay, did he learn from that encounter? Did he get better at it next time? Did he choose a better location? Did he choose a better method? Did he, I guess that's what I have to wonder too, because I have heard that said of serial killers, that the first couple times they're a little shaky at it, and it's almost like they unfortunately have to get better at it.
And given the deep dive that you probably did into researching all the stories of the victims and all of that, do you think that there were probably other victims that haven't turned up yet? Or do you think that those were the 12, and it was
I
that
I
was
am
it.
sure. I am sure there were other encounters that maybe were not as violent,
Mhm.
like Margie's. He went off to smoke with people all the time. He was part of the landscape of Woodward Avenue. He was a drug addict. He smoked crack. He also prostituted himself. So he was working as a prostitute himself. He was very much living a life at risk, and he was preying on females who were living a life at risk. And I think that it was part of his day to day life to go off and smoke with someone. And I have a feeling that there were a lot of situations where they say that when he smoked, he became someone else, almost like a demonic, like, oh my gosh, that's not him anymore. And so I would think that there were lots of situations where maybe something started up and the woman just left, and was able to escape even any kind of bad encounter with him. But I'm sure that there were others who, I guess the short answer, I'm sure that there were other females who had a weird encounter with him, maybe a violent encounter with him, but never came forward, because that is something that happens so often with these women when they are living on the street. They get attacked a lot more than people realize. They get attacked almost like a normal occurrence as part of the work that they're trying to do, unfortunately. And so I would not be a bit surprised if that happened with Atkins.
I noticed in the forward of your book, you dedicate it to the memory of all those women who perished at his hands.
Yes, definitely. They are the most important part. And they are always, in both of these true crime book projects that I've done, both of the cases that I've researched, they are the most fascinating part of the case for me. Because to me, they are everyone. They're your sister, they're your daughter, they're your cousin, they're the gal you work with, whatever. They're everyone that we've known in our lives, but their life had a wrong turn or two, and it put them out into a different situation. And it could happen to anyone. And that is truly what I believe. And in learning about each one of these women, that is disturbing and something that I think everyone should realize, that it's not like we can look at them, okay, they're just sex workers, they're just prostitutes. No, they're people, and their lives had something that went wrong. And it often is addiction. Addiction is just so prevalent through all of this. So that's a very unfortunate part of it.
Absolutely. And I guess also that the time frame kind of lent itself a little bit to his killing spree, because Detroit, like you said, was going through just a really bad crime phase around the 90s also.
Yeah, homicides were pretty high. Several hundred homicides a year in Detroit. I want to say at the time of the case, it was around 600. I think at the time of the Armstrong case, if I remember correctly, 1999, the year that Monica Johnson was killed by Armstrong, that was December 1999. And that was the first one that we know he killed in Detroit. I believe the number of homicides that year was around 400 and some change. But in the earlier 90s, it was higher at the time that Atkins was killing. I'm not sure why that was, but yeah, Detroit has been called the murder capital of the country or of the world a time or two. And I know it lost that title to Washington, D.C. at one time, and maybe it's bounced around a little bit. But Detroit has always had that reputation of being a murder capital.
Yeah, kind of a dubious title to achieve, I guess.
Right. Right.
So you've written 10 books. Were the other 8, did they have to do with true crime, or did you write a lot of different genres?
Well, actually, I've written like 10 others, I believe, leading up to these true crime projects. I've written in the pop culture genre. I am a big classic TV fan, so I have written about TV shows that I've known and loved and grown up with, like from the 80s or even the 1970s. Big TV junkie. And then I've also done a few novels along the way. I wrote a couple novels that were set in Detroit. I wrote a novel that was set in Georgia, and then I wrote a sci-fi novel as well. So I've written a little bit of everything, I guess. Yeah,
that's great for people who like to sample a lot of different stuff. Where can people find out about your work?
Well, I have the website brbates.com. That's where the true crime projects are. And I've been keeping them separate from my pop culture stuff, which is under a brand name called BRB TV. So if you go to brbtv.com, you'll see all that stuff. But yeah, the domain brbates.com is the location for all of this true crime stuff.
Okay, we will definitely keep that in mind, especially for all the, because I know whenever we do true crime interviews, people tend to love that more than anything else. I'm like, wait, who got killed? How did they find this out?
Yeah, it's been such a big genre the past like 5 to 10 years. It's really exploded. And I didn't have an interest in it years ago, but I just found myself like probably 5 to 10 years ago, I found myself really, actually, it probably was 10 to 15 years ago. I found myself just really getting interested in like the Dateline TV show and the Forensic Files and all of that. I started watching that stuff. I started watching the ID Network and Oxygen. And that's why I really decided to take on a true crime project, because I had heard of the case. My collaborator for that first book, his name is Dr. Gerald Cliff, and he worked the Armstrong case back in the day for Detroit police. And he was the one actually who had an idea to do a book about Armstrong, and a mutual friend introduced us. And then we started collaborating on that project. And I found it so interesting and so rewarding. And I found myself wishing that I had started working on those projects way back when, because it was just, I just really enjoyed the research. I actually enjoyed getting the files, making the FOIA requests and digging into the criminal files, looking through the police reports, looking through the autopsy reports, just digging through for clues to what I think is the $1 million question of why these two men decided to take human life, why that even happened in the first place. Because don't we all wonder that? Don't we wonder, okay, what's the difference between them and me? Why did they do it and I never would? What is it? Is it brain chemistry, or is it the circumstances of their background, the old nature versus nurture argument?
I think you actually just answered my next question, because I was going to say, what do you think draws people to true crime? And I think you really hit the nail on the head with that it's that curiosity of human nature.
Yep. Why? How could this happen? And is it possible that I or someone I know could do something like that someday? We all compare ourselves to others. It's human nature to do that. So yeah, I think it's that idea like, okay, what happened? What went wrong in that person's life?
Absolutely. Okay, so her name is B.R. Bates. Again, the book is called The Crack City Strangler, The Homicides of Serial Killer Benjamin Atkins, Murders in the Motor City. Book 2. Also check out Book 1 as well. B.R. Bates, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Listen and subscribe on podcast apps everywhere. And we're on YouTube at Sherpolution. Sorry, no video. You're welcome.
Thank you very much for checking out the Sherpa Screening Room, and thanks so much to B.R. Bates. Be sure to check out her book. I think you're going to enjoy it. I got a preview copy of it. That's one of the perks of being a Sherpa. And I got to tell you, it's a good read and really fascinating stuff. I think you're really going to enjoy it. Like I said, especially if you are a true crime fan. Hey, if you are keeping track, I know we see some numbers in front of all the episode listings and it gets a little confusing, but where we are right now is season 13, episode 24, and you know that I do 26 in a season. So that means next week will be our season finale for season 13, and the following week will be the wrap-up, because I like to acknowledge all the good folks who got to spend a little time here in the Sherpa Chalet with me, and were brave enough to do so. We salute you! So all of that is coming in the very near future. And of course, the trivia podcast will probably be debuting within the next several weeks. It is called Fake People, Real Trivia. It's something I think you might get a kick out of if you are a trivia buff. And I hope you do check it out. And I think at the wrap up, you will hear the trailer for that podcast as well. So thank you so much once again. And Lord, Mr. Bruce, I think it's time to head on out of here. So until then, I say to you, Viva la Sherpolution.
Thanks for listening to the Sherpa Screening Room. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, review, and share this podcast. I'm Mr. Bruce, and this has been a Sherpa Studios production. Viva la Sherpalution!